Hello, my name is Julie Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and I want to thank you for joining us. Our webinar today is presented by IDSA member Axiad, Achieving Passwordless for People and Machines. Before we get started, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's session, so please make sure to share the link with your colleagues. You can submit questions for our speakers through the Q&A chat window. And lastly, if you would like to earn ISC squared CPE credits, there's a link in the portal where you can provide your ISC squared member number, and we will submit your participation in this webinar on your behalf. So before we get started today, I want to make sure to take a moment to introduce you to the Identity Defined Security Alliance, or IDSA. The IDSA is a nonprofit that provides thought leadership, expertise, and practical guidance on securing digital identities. The IDSA provides vendor-neutral research, education, and best practices that help organizations reduce the risk of an identity-related attack. Membership is open to identity and security vendors, as well as end-user companies and practitioners who are committed to the vision of an identity-centric approach to security. If you haven't already, I encourage you to check out the website, idsalliance.org, to access our content and learn more about membership. So let's get started. We have a great session today. I'd like to introduce you to Matt Bates, the Senior Partner Alliances Manager with Ping Identity, who will act as your Masters of Ceremony.
All right. Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you to the IDSA for your support and for hosting today's webinar. As Julie mentioned, I'm Matt Bates with Ping Identity, and I'm going to be helping guide today's discussion. As Julie mentioned, we are going to be taking questions through today's webinar, but we're going to answer them at the end. But if at any time during today's webinar you want to submit a question, just please click on the question mark icon, and we'll make sure to log that and answer it at the end of today's call. If for any reason you experience any technical issues, there is an operator icon, and just check on that, and we'll address and resolve your issue as quickly as possible. And lastly, for those joining the webinar, if you have a colleague who isn't able to join, this will be recorded, so you can access the recording on demand to see the information and material that we've covered. So with that said, I would like to introduce our two speakers for today. Joining today's call are Bassam Al-Khalidi of Axiad and Ping Identity's Aubrey Turner. Bassam has over 15 years of experience in designing and deploying identity and access management solutions across large government, enterprise, and healthcare organizations. He's a leading expert in CAC-PIV smart card and PKI deployment, and has been involved in multiple enterprise-class ID badge deployments over the last several years. He's held a variety of management and senior technical roles for established industry leaders, including Active Identity. Aubrey Turner has extensive background successfully delivering strategic enterprise cybersecurity solutions to Fortune 1000 companies that address business problems, strengthens organizations, reduces risk, and delivers positive business outcomes. Aubrey has demonstrated rapport and consensus building with key stakeholders. Thank you, Aubrey and Bassam, for joining today. So to kind of set the stage and set the scene, why are we here today, and why are you all joining to listen to today's presentation? Passwordless is a term many of you are probably familiar with, but what does that really mean in practical terms? And probably even more importantly, how and where should you begin, and what does that journey look like? Today, we're going to dive into this topic, why it is important for organizations today. Aubrey and Bassam are going to share some thoughts on how to define what it means to be passwordless, and also some insights into practical steps that organizations can take to implement a passwordless strategy. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Bassam and Aubrey. Bassam.
Matt, thank you very much, and really excited to be here with Aubrey to kind of discuss this really important topic. A little bit about myself and about Axiad. My business partner, my co-founder, Eve, and myself started Axiad back in 2010. We're headquarters in California and have offices in India and in Canada. And really, what we try to do is something extremely simple yet complex at the same time. Is try to bring that complete trust in digital identity within your enterprise, whether it's for devices, machines, all your different digital interactions. At the end of the day, we're only as strong and as secure as our communication is, as we interact digitally with everyone and everything from anywhere and everywhere. So that's really, in a nutshell, what Axiad does. We'll kind of dive into a lot more around this topic, and especially around digital interactions for users and machines. Hand it over to Aubrey.
Yeah, and thank you, Bassam. So just a brief word about Ping Identity. If you haven't heard of us, so our mission at Ping is to help protect users across the various digital interactions that you may have, making that experience frictionless. And the idea here is to drive customer engagement, help increase user productivity, and deliver frictionless experiences. So we're securing that the entire user journey, the digital user journey, any device to any service or app, and being that glue that facilitates that secure experience. We're trusted and proven in the enterprise, over half of the Fortune 100, and we're known for our scale and ability to execute, as well as our focus on standards. So with that, let's dive right into the heart of the matter, and again, why you're all here. So we all know passwords are not secure. At least, hopefully, we should know that. There are a number of reasons for that, and we'll weave that story into the next 5 minutes or so as we kind of build the background for why passwordless and how you get there. But a couple things, right? Passwords are easily forgotten and stolen. Server-side credentials can be stolen via phishing. And the data tells us about 80% of breaches are due to brute force or stolen passwords. So stolen username and passwords. We also know that those credentials have a value on the dark web of anywhere from $5 or $10 US to $500, just depending on the PII that comes with that stolen username and password. I have gone through and counted up the number of passwords that I have in my password manager, and it's somewhere in this neighborhood, which is just ridiculous. How is somebody expected to remember 191 different sets of username and passwords? It's not realistic, and this is the problem. Passwords don't scale for how we're securing access in today's world. So again, we've got a lot of different username and passwords. And the other thing here is 70% of us reuse passwords across those sites. So again, if one of those username and passwords is stolen, then the attacker can reuse them. And again, there are things that it's okay to reuse, repurpose in our daily lives. Paper and plastic, glass jugs, et cetera. But you got to really think twice about reusing a Q-tip or a Band-Aid or motor oil. So that kind of helps you kind of understand, sort of the sort of backdrop as to the lack of security associated with passwords. Bassam, jump in here and kind of talk to us about what the business problem of passwords really is about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on the password side, we've made the authentication journey, as you referred to it, we're making it more complex on a day-to-day for the end user, and it's adding a lot of security, but is it enough? So what do I mean by that? So we've been surveying a lot of our clients and other clients and people that are in the industry, and we found some really interesting stats that we wanted to share today. 60% of leaders today say there's a big confusion when it comes to MFA. Why is there confusion with MFA, and what's going on? So as Aubrey mentioned, passwords are everywhere, right? We're not going to get rid of them today or overnight and just like tomorrow morning be gone with them. So what has happened? What's happened is because of password reuse, password sharing between different applications, I use it here and there. What's happened is we've made it more complex. How have we done that? Password length, password complexity, the need to change passwords every 30, 60, 90 days. And even that was not enough, right? So what did we add on top of that? We added multi-factor authentication, which is fantastic. I think it's the first line of defense. It's better than not having anything, which is really good. But what it does, it's adding a lot of fatigue across the board for the end user and the administrator side. How so? The reason being is now not only do I still have that complexity of the password, the long, different, complex passwords in these different applications, I still have to reset them and change them every 30, 60, 90 days, depending on the industry and the application that I'm using them for. And on top of it, not only do I have to enter it, then I have to enter a third value that I'm getting from a multi-factor authentication. Again, I want to be very clear here. MFA is fantastic. We highly recommend it, but we're just looking at it from a user's journey, that it's not just that I have an MFA, different applications have different multi-factor authentication protocols or mechanisms or authenticators. So if it's not working here, when I call help desk, which one is the one that's not working? Are they part of the same platform? Are they in different platforms? Where do I reset this one? How do I change that one? Which one do I give to which user population? So that's what we're seeing from some of the surveys, is there's a lot of MFA fatigue within the organization from both the end user and from the help desk / administrator side. Then we add on top of it, what we see happened in the last couple of years is the perimeter completely got destroyed. And the perimeters, we always had this notion of people working in the office and working remote. But what I mean by the perimeter got destroyed, because even our remote workers overnight, not only did they become all remote, but a lot of organizations were forced to open up their network to full BYOD without having the time to put together a proper strategy on how to address BYOD and address its own security risks. But to ensure continuation of business, they accelerated some of these efforts. So of course, that added new attack and new risk vectors. Last but not least, with all the security that we've added, whether it's additional complex password, the password change, adding all these different MFAs, phishing is still on the rise. It's still not solving the phishing problem. So that means there's still something we need to do. There's still things we can do better on our digital interactions to eliminate phishing and to eliminate other attacks and other attack vectors. So there's still a lot to do. I think we've come a long way when it comes to security with passwords, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, so kind of continuing along those themes and kind of why we've had these roadblocks to passwordless. We've certainly been talking about kill the password for probably a decade now. I believe that the technology is kind of caught up with the hype, and there'll be a lot more to come on that. It's a little foreshadowing there, but we still have these obstacles and challenges when it comes to being passwordless. In addition to, next to zero trust is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in terms of recent identity topics. And so associated with that misunderstanding, some of the roadblocks include some of the legacy apps and technical debt that Bassam alluded to. We're humans, and we are naturally somewhat, we've got fear of change and kind of that whole who moved my cheese type of thing. So fear of the unknown. We're not, many of us are not readily able to do something different, and passwords they're so familiar to us, right? They're so ingrained that doing something different, that fear of change kind of plays a major role as a roadblock. And then certainly one of the big things that I see when I talk to customers about passwordless is the various user scenarios that any given organization may have. And Bassam touched on this, right? You may think of a hospital, right? You have the administrative staff, and they've got one set of laptops and desktops and devices that may be readily amenable to passwordless capability. But then you've actually got clinicians and people on a hospital floor, and they may be likely wearing gloves and glass and other protective wear that may make it so that in their particular scenario, one type of passwordless methodology may not work for them. I think one of the key things, and this is, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in terms of kind of a key takeaway. I think ask yourself as you're going down the passwordless and defining the user experience, can an 8-year-old or 80-year-old use this technology? Kind of, I don't want to call it a rule of thumb, but ask yourself from a change management perspective, could your 8-year-old child or your 8-year-old grandmother or mom use the new passwordless feature that you're looking to deploy? So those are some of the roadblocks, and again, we have to acknowledge them because passwords are cheap, they're easy to implement. despite the drawbacks that we've talked about with them, easily being stolen, easily forgotten. We've got to figure out ways to get over these roadblocks. And just to kind of continuing along that stream of consciousness in terms of why we should, why we should get rid of passwords. And again, we've touched on this, but certainly, what's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So if we continue to use passwords, even with complex passwords, we can't really expect to not get breached. And what we've done with passwords is we've treated the symptoms with complexity rules and quote unquote strong passwords. And I can certainly make an argument that there's no such thing as a complex or strong password, particularly when it comes to phishing, right? Because it doesn't matter how complex the password is. If it gets phished, it's done, right? So the reasons why we should eliminate passwords, certainly security, mitigate credential stuffing, and the credentials that are on the dark web available, account takeover. Yes, we've asked users to use complex password policies. That's a poor user experience, trying to remember, characters and numbers and dashes and this and that. So that's painful. And then yes, the cost and simple what am I trying to say here? The cost and how easy it is to implement passwords. We need to look at the other side of that, and that Forrester's estimating it's $70 roughly per reset. In your organization, that may be higher or lower. What we also know is that about 11 hours are lost annually. We as humans spend about 11 hours annually just resetting passwords. So these are some of the reasons why we should eliminate passwords. Bassam, any additional thoughts that you have here to kind of drive home the point of why we should eliminate them and why we should move forward before I move on?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the two key two takeaway points, or the two key points here, is one, the poor user experience, right? The more complex we make it, the more annoying it is to the end users, and the more end users get annoyed, the more ways they find around it.
Yeah.
So what are they going to start to do? They're going to start writing these critical passwords down, whether they write them on sticky notes, as we've seen in some areas, in their desks and their laptops. What's worse, when they start writing them in files in their own machine in clear text, or whether they start one scenario we saw, which was even worse, they were putting them in recurring meeting makers in their calendar, and their calendar is shared, right? So there's as security makes it more complex for the end users will find a way to simplify their daily interactions with ads, which adds a lot of risk. But if we cannot address it in a way, as you mentioned, I love the example that you made, right? As long as anyone and everyone in the organization can interact with this new method, whatever we want to call this new method, a passwordless method, however it is, as long as we can have that test, whether it's an 8-year-old, 18, 20, up to 80-year-old, if anybody can use it at any time and very simply, then we have something.
Yeah, definitely. So a little bit of a glimmer of hope, right? So this is from a consumer survey that Ping did, a survey that we did last year. We surveyed users or people in about 8 countries: UK, Germany, France, United States, Canada, Australia, and a handful of others that I'm forgetting. But the main point here is that 46% of consumers prefer sites that offer passwordless alternatives. So almost half of us are warming up to something that's different from a password. And I'm getting that warm, fuzzy feeling. So again, over half of us feel better when using something like MFA to sign into sites. So the data is telling us that people are, and sometimes you have to, sometimes people will run towards something. Sometimes they have to be dragged. It's like that old saying, you can, bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. But it looks like people are certainly warming up to these different experiences that Bassam and I have been talking about. So that's really good news. It's like, think about things in your own life that make you feel more comfortable, whether it's something that's warranted or guaranteed, home alarm, pet, whatever it is, right? People are feeling more comfortable around these different concepts and these different alternatives to passwords. So now is the point in our presentation where we need to define what passwordless authentication actually is. Let's all get on the same page, because as I mentioned, there's been more confusion. Probably the only thing that's, like I said, as equally confusing is zero trust. So let's talk about what passwordless really is. And so the definition that Bassam and I came up with, and I don't think this is anything, if you Google this, you might come across this, but what we decided to share with you today is any method of verifying the identity of a user or device that does not rely on passwords. And there are a couple of goals associated with that, right? So we want to use fewer passwords. And yes, that counts as passwordless, and we'll talk about that. And eventually getting rid of passwords. So let me kind of give you a couple examples. So passwordless could be something only the user holds, like a phone or a security key, or something only the user does, so a trait. And this includes recognition signals, identity recognition signals that say, yes, this is Aubrey, yes, this is Bassam, so forth and so on. And again, hopefully Bassam and I are hammering this point home. The goal of this is still improving the user experience and security while reducing risk. Bassam, jump in here if you have any additional thoughts or anything else you want the audience to know when it comes to defining passwordless and how they maybe should talk about it to regulators, auditors, leaders in their company when they're asking, hey, I've been hearing about passwordless. What is it? What does it mean? Feel free to tag on there.
Yeah, I think a critical point here is when we were looking at how are we going to define this for this specific webinar is, the second point of the statement, a device that does not rely on passwords. I think that's a very key point. Aubrey, in the beginning of his presentation, kind of walked you guys through how he has over 190 some passwords that he's using today. But he made a very important statement at the same time that they're in a password manager. So we want to be very clear that storing passwords in a password manager and then using a method of authentication to authenticate to that password manager to release the password, that's a great step, but that's not the end passwordless state that we're referring to here. Here, what we're referring to is truly getting rid of using passwords. So a concrete example of what Aubrey and I are referring to here for this webinar is we're talking about, for example, if you're logging into your Windows machine is a good example of this. If you're logging into an application or into a product that you're authenticating without a password to that product, and then that product is releasing your Windows password to your endpoint, we don't think that's true passwordless. It's some form of passwordless because the user is not entering their password, but it's not the passwordless that we're referring to here in this webinar. Here, what we're trying to do is not just put a medicine on the disease, on the use of password. We're trying to cure it. So if we're trying to cure it, we have to truly eliminate the use of password for that application. That means as an end user, when I interact with my endpoints, or let's say I'm logging into Windows, at no point in time should I know my Windows password, nor should my system need it or has the need for it to be used in any shape or form. And therefore, now it's a true passwordless experience. Why? Because now even if you have attack vectors like phishing attacks or man-in-the-middle attacks or stuff like that, because we are not or replay attacks, because there is no submitting a password by the end user or by the application at any point in time, you eliminate these risks and these attack vectors. So in the rest of the presentation, that's what we're defining as passwordless, as the elimination of the need to use that password, not just by the end user, but by the application or the device itself as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about how we get there and what the journey to passwordless can look like. And there are a number of factors here, and we want to be practical and realistic in terms of because we understand those various scenarios, the roadblocks, the technical debt, the compatibility concerns, and again the human factor. So we wanted to try to define a journey to passwordless and how folks can get there. And we start with centralized authentication, consolidated authentication, which is really single sign-on plus MFA. And then we move by sort of beginning to phase out passwords. And by the way, in that SSO MFA, in the last decade or so of my work history, I've just had one password, right? One password. I mean, we've been using MFA. That is the early stage of passwordless, right? And this is kind of that crawl, walk, run type model. Then you begin to kind of phase out passwords by using things. Again, you've taken that SSO and MFA and add risk signals to that mix. I'm going to call that the identity turducken. It's MFA into, risk into MFA into single sign-on. And that's something where, again, you may not have to use your password. It's still there, but you may not have to use it for weeks because risk signals are saying, hey, is this Aubrey? Is this Bassam? Have they done anything different? Do they look the same? What's changed behaviorally, et cetera, et cetera. So that counts as passwordless less. Then we move into, and excuse me, I should be kind of building out some of these slides here, so forgive me. Some of those kind of phasing passwords out, you may include things like magic links and QR codes, for example. And QR codes have made a huge comeback as of late. And this is, by the way, a QR code is something an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old can use. Passes that sort of test that I mentioned earlier. Around FIDO and adopting standards, and it's great that, and this, by the way, there's been a lot of news, a lot in the news about passwordless this past couple of weeks with Apple, Microsoft, Google, and others kind of jumping on board and really leaning into standards. So those standards support things like roaming and platform authenticators and security keys and biometrics, et cetera, et cetera. And then true passwordless, where we will have an identity proofing event, a trusted device, and digital certificates. And in this scenario, a password, as Bassam talked about, does not even exist. There isn't one. There's not a fallback, as in some of the other steps in the journey. But your mileage may vary, and you've got to look at your environment, understand what experience you're looking to deliver for your end user. Look at how likely it is for your organization to change. All the other sort of roadblocks, understanding those things and figure out, what method of passwordless works for you. And Bassam is going to touch on how you might be able to leapfrog some of this. There are some use cases and likely some environments in your organization where you might be able to jump ahead to true passwordless. And that's great if you're able to do that. But if not, just know that there are some dedicated or some measured steps that you can follow to get to that end state. Bassam, kind of touch on that leapfrogging thing, if that makes sense now.
Totally, absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more. And if we look here at the trajectory of how do we get to eliminate passwords, honestly, we hope. I don't have it. I'm using my mouse, and I thought I had a cursor, but I don't have a cursor here. But I think we hope everyone is here at the password phase out passwords, where if we're doing SSO, MFA, and risk. And magic links, that's at least from a security risk and security posture, we're in a good spot, right? We, SSO plus MFA alone is it's good, but it's not good enough. So at least we want to be in that SSO, MFA plus risk, because with the as Aubrey mentioned, those identity signals and all that, it plays into a key factor of your strategy of today. And in the future, when you go to passwordless, these elements will still be needed, so you will leverage your ROI out of it twice, not only for today, but in the future when you go to full passwordless. So how can we leapfrog from this state, from our password first out state to true passwordless, and continue to leverage the investment that we've made when it comes to MFA risk, the magic links, QR code? So how do we do that? How can we leapfrog that? How can we get there? So being in that state of where we are with password plus MFA plus the identity signals, when we go to true passwordless and can leapfrog leveraging industry standards like FIDO2 and like PKI, and we'll talk a little bit more about FIDO2 and PKI, I think, on the next slide. But what it will also give us is it gives that, as Aubrey mentioned, that user experience. It's something that I have, and that something that I have could be something in my hand, like a device, like a mobile device, or it could be a security token or a security key, or it could be the motherboard or the TPM inside the device itself. So that's the something that I have. And the something that I know could be something extremely simple, like an ATM-like experience, me entering a PIN, or me just doing Face ID, Touch ID, some sort of biometric. And again, that passes the test, whether it's an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old, because everyone is very familiar with an ATM-like experience. And everyone, because of all the smart devices that we have, everyone's very familiar with Face ID and Touch ID, or some sort of biometric authentication. So now if I'm doing that biometric authentication and that simplified authentication, how can we get rid of passwords but not sacrificing any of the security? And that's how what we're recommending as an approach is to remove the need for password, still have the user authenticate with either a PIN or a biometric, so that they have that comfort of leveraging an MFA. But the relying technology behind the scene is to use something like FIDO2 or PKI, so that we can eliminate the need for passwords behind the scenes and the users can authenticate. A very important point that Aubrey brought up is it's not only do we want to eliminate passwords, but we want to eliminate the continuous threat that the organization is forced with. So something like risk assessment, identity signals, those will come in handy, because we want to make sure not can we authenticate the user securely in a passwordless way, but we want to ensure that there's continuous authentication to ensure that the user is securely authenticated all the time. What does that mean? That means just because I logged in one time to my desk in the morning and I logged into a passwordless mode, we want to ensure that any and all transactions after that are still under that same level of security. So how would we do that? That's where what Aubrey was referring to, having identity signals, having that continuous authentication model. Microsoft talks about it a lot in their Carter. So we're seeing that theme over and over. And that's what we think as both Ping and Axiad can walk you and help you through that journey and that process, no matter where you are in this presentation here, or specifically in this slide, and how can we get you to the next to the next phase. We talked a little bit about FIDO and PKI. Sorry, Aubrey. We talked a little bit about FIDO and PKI, but we wanted to kind of dive into a little bit more around what FIDO and PKI would look like, and why do I need to use both? Why can't I just use one or the other? The reason why we recommend using both is because FIDO, as again Aubrey referred to, is we saw a lot of announcements in the last 2 weeks about some of the big, large companies, especially around OS and browsers, adopting more and more of the FIDO2. But what PKI gives you today's technology that with FIDO2 at the same time, and it makes you future-proof for tomorrow's technology. And then it gives you the capability to address all your different use cases, regardless what technology you use behind the scenes. We need to simplify the authentication journey for the end user. So as an end user, I honestly don't want to know, or don't need to know, which relying technology behind the scenes is making my authentication secure, as long as it is secure and as long as I have that notion and that perception of security. So what we try to do is make sure whatever authenticator the user is using, whether it's a mobile device, whether it's a token in their hand, whether it's they're leveraging their TPM on their device, ensuring that the user has all these different authenticators, and then submitting the appropriate passwordless authenticator to the application, so that the user can authenticate to that application in a passwordless way and in a secure way. So we don't want to solve convenience at the sake of security. We want to make sure that we have the most secure authentication in a passwordless way. If we're going to go passwordless and add new elements of risk to the authentication, then we're no better than passwords themselves. I talked a little bit about use cases, and this is important. Why is it important? Because when we look at the user interaction, when we talk to a lot of our customers, Fortune 500, Global 2000, what they do is they look at it internally of what is the fastest path to go to passwordless, or what is the fastest path to go to MFA. And we don't believe there's a silver bullet, unfortunately, to solve all these different use cases. You might need different flavors of passwordless authenticators to address all these use cases. The reason being is you might have one or two passwordless methods that can address 70, 80% of your business. But do we want to just address 70 or 80% of the business? That becomes your next security hole that we will have to address. So we need to have a path to how do we're not saying you have to do it overnight and all of them one time. On the contrary, exactly what Aubrey mentioned, we need to look in the beginning of this presentation, we need to look at a technology roadmap within your organization to look at how can we slowly but surely start addressing all these use cases and not leaving any use cases behind. We've seen that in a lot of organizations where they'll address 70, 80, 90%, leave the other 10. That becomes a big risk factor, or becomes an area of probably a threat vector, an attack vector on that organization. Aubrey, I don't know if what you've seen with other organizations, whether they tackle all of these, or what's your thought on this?
Yeah, no, there's usually some risk-driven method that they're using. You could kind of go low-hanging fruit. I have yet to see kind of big bang, just because, again, of the complexity and some of the other issues. But I do recommend, understanding the user experience and understanding the impact analysis, right? If users are going to be heavily impacted and adversely impacted, they're likely not a good area to start with. So I think understand all of your use cases and then prioritize the ones based on risk, user experience, and all those factors, and kind of rationalize those against that roadmap. And it's the same thing with the machine authentication use cases. The only thing is the machines can't really talk back. they may not have an opinion. So they might be a little bit easier to build passwordless into your machine authentication flows. So again, just a snapshot of some machine-based authentication use cases that we're seeing. And by the way, people are starting to express interest in this, right? The focus on passwordless has been around humans, but guess what? These machines are, and as Bassam shared, they're growing faster than humans. So they should be part of become part of your passwordless strategy. And then people I think are waking up to that and asking more and more about it. So as we talk about moving to passwordless authentication, I think optionality is key as you understand your users and the user types and the user experience, understanding the impact. It's good to have optionality, right? So it could be roaming authenticators or platform-based authenticators. The good news is, and this is talking about this a lot more, is phishing resistant. You probably see that and hear about that. And that just means you can't really stick a man in the middle type of attack in there, which you can with server-side credentials. That's the vulnerability of the current credential model that we use. And again, that's not scaling very, very well for how we need to do authentication today and tomorrow. We've moved past this binary yes/no from an authentication perspective. And so we need to look at these phishing resistant passwordless methods and have that optionality. So Bassam, anything else you wanted to say here before we move ahead? I know we want to make sure that we leave some time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just echoing what you're saying. Looking on, we don't want to do the big bang. It's important that whatever solution you go to can support, even if it's non-phishing resistant, you still want to make sure that the solution that you go with still has the option to support them. So it helps you in your migration process. It helps you not create that big disruption across the board. So what you want to look for, what we recommend all the time, is you want to look for a solution that can support phishing and non-phishing authenticators, support the gambit. And then what it does, it gives you that flexibility to slowly but surely migrate different populations to a passwordless journey.
Yeah, solve today's challenges with the flexibility to deal with tomorrow. So again, pulling passwordless, we see standards like FICO, certainly FIDO. I must be thinking about my credit score. Standards like FIDO, FIDO2, and PKI coming together to again have that flexibility, have that adaptability, solve the use cases for today as well as tomorrow. That unified authentication platform with orchestration of identities throughout across people and machines. Anything to add here, Bassam, before we move into kind of some key takeaways and then questions?
Yeah, I think as Aubrey is mentioned throughout this whole slide, right? It's look at where you are today, where you want to go, and partnerships are key. right? We together we definitely provide a better comprehensive solution, technology roadmap, partnership, and I think that's why we're all here as people in the industry, that we trying to solve this big massive problem that spans all different verticals, is really the better together story. We're all better, stronger together, and I think Matt would be the best person to kind of walk us through that as well.
Yeah. So just kind of a few kind of takeaways and kind of recap of what we've covered so far. Bassam called this out, right? There is no silver bullet. Passwordless is an experience. Yes, there's products and capability and features, but it is about an experience, and there is no silver bullet for that. Define what passwordless means to your organization. We've certainly defined it for you. Understand your risk appetite. Understand the user impact and flows, as well as those various scenarios that you may have. And then I love how Bassam called this out: partner to scale, identify internal and external stakeholders, including regulators and auditors. They may not understand what passwordless really means. Do not assume that they know what it is. And I've seen in a couple of cases where a regulator or auditor has held up a passwordless initiative because they were not comfortable with the new security model. So make sure you partner and stakeholders, and that includes your technology partners as well. And then pilot, rationalize existing capabilities. I love that Bassam talked about being flexible across the various use cases. No need to rip and replace if you don't have to. Add new capabilities as needed. The best platforms will allow you to do that. Provide options to meet various user needs and scenarios and various experiences. And then again, this point of, you may be able to accelerate from that one of those earlier parts of the journey to actual true passwordless. There might be some use cases and scenarios in your organization where you're able to leapfrog with, again, a true passwordless scenario. So Matt, let's hand it to you for some questions. We've got a few minutes before we wrap up.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you, Bassam. I think that was really, really great, and you kind of hit everything at the end. And it really focuses on why are we all members of the IDSA? It's the thought leadership, it's the discussion, it's the the sharing of challenges that we all see across the industry, and how we work together and collaborate, to help bring solutions that can help customers solve those challenges. So just really, really great content and discussion. So really appreciate that. So looking through some of the questions that have come through, I'll throw it up to either one of you. I know we only have a couple minutes, but this is a pretty good one. But is passwordless authentication more secure? You kind of mentioned it tilts towards user experience, which folks can say that there's a balance you must strike between user experience and security. So either one, I mean, can you share why it would in fact be more secure?
Bassam,
yeah, actually,
thank you.
I'll share. Yeah, no worries. I'll share from my personal experience. I think as part of my background prior to starting Axiad, myself and a lot of my team members here at Axiad, we were at a company called Active Identity. We did the DoD CAT card. That DoD CAT card program really was the genesis of how do we get to a passwordless state. How can we really truly eliminate password depending on cryptography and X509 certs and now kind of leapfrog into FIDO 2 and other security elements. So how can we eliminate passwords without introducing new threat vectors, and how do we do that in a concrete and secure way? Unfortunately, when a lot of companies throw the term passwordless, but I want to reiterate again, storing the password or storing the credential that you authenticate to something and then it submits it on your behalf is not true passwordless. So in that case, I completely agree with Aubrey's statements. If you're going to go to an auditor and say, this is our strategy for passwordless, this is not more secure because you're still receptive to attacks like password replay or password capturing or phishing. There's still other attack vectors that you can. So a true passwordless solution does not rely on using a password in any shape or form. It's not stored anywhere. It's not replaced. It's not replayed. It's not there. So not all password solutions are created equal. And that's very important when you talk about your passwordless strategy. Challenge it. ask questions. Are we using passwords anywhere? Are they stored anywhere? Are they being replayed anywhere? Who has access to them? Why do we still need them? These are very important questions to ask to anybody that starts talking about we want to go down a passwordless journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Bassam. And I know we are right at time. And so we just want to be conscious of everyone, for joining today, and just thank our host, the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and as well as, to our speakers, Bassam and Aubrey. Thank you for your thoughtful insights and perspectives. We do encourage anyone to go explore any of the websites from the IDSA, Axiad, and Ping Identity for additional information, or reach out if you've got any questions. But really do appreciate everyone's time today, and take care, everyone, and have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.